Hey, what do you mean? Why are you leaving her alone when she's in this condition? Please, take her to the hospital. I had just returned home from work to find my 1-year-old daughter crying unusually. My husband, however, was nonchalantly watching TV, erupting in laughter at the comedian's jokes. "Leave her alone," he scoffed. "She's not new to crying. She'll grow tired of it and shut up." It was true that the daughter I was holding in my arms had stopped crying, probably from exhaustion. However, her complexion was pale and her lips were bloodless. Panic surged through me. I quickly called for an ambulance. At the hospital, after the doctor examined her, he told me something shocking. My husband, it turned out, had broken a promise he made to me and continued to do so in secret. When I questioned my husband, who arrived at the hospital much later, his face flushed crimson. "Are you having so much fun making me the bad guy?" he spat. "You told me to look at our daughter, so I only watched her. You didn't tell me to stop if she cried or to go to the hospital if something was wrong, right?" With that, my husband, declaring himself unjustly vilified, stormed out of the hospital. I was left reeling, anger simmering within me. I decided to take revenge on my husband, who had put my daughter's life in danger and showed no remorse. Let me rewind a bit. I'm a married woman in my late 20s. I met my husband through volunteer work in the community. I was participating on a personal basis, but my husband regularly volunteered as part of his company's policy. He treated everyone with respect and without discrimination, and was especially empathetic when dealing with the elderly and small children. It was this quality that attracted me to him. We met several times through volunteer work, and our relationship gradually blossomed into something more personal. After a passionate proposal, we got married. I had left my parents' home to go to university, and instead of returning to my hometown, I got a job in the city center. Even after getting married, I ended up living closer to the city center than my hometown. Since my husband had to commute to work, he said it would be helpful if he could live in the city center, so we found a place that worked for both of us. We were enjoying our newlywed life, happy and in love. I was a little concerned that my in-laws' house was closer than my parents' house, but I had no problems getting along with them. In particular, my father-in-law, who started judo when he was young, continues to practice even now at the age of 60. I, too, was active in martial arts when I was a child, so we had many conversations about it. I got pregnant shortly after getting married. A year and a half later, I safely gave birth to our daughter. It was a joyous day, welcoming a new member to our family. When I gave birth, my in-laws, my parents, and my husband all came to help me. I felt loved and supported. I felt lucky to have so many people looking forward to my daughter's birth. I imagined someday when my daughter grew up, I would tell her all about this time. However, the happiness didn't last very long. It came to light that the savings amount and annual income my husband had presented before our marriage were false. As for the amount of savings, we agreed to work on increasing it together, so I let it slide. However, I wanted him to be honest about his annual income. Before I took maternity and childcare leave, we were both working, so I never really thought about how little my husband earned. However, as I was taking a leave of absence to raise our child, my income was reduced, and our daily life was slowly beginning to be affected. It's fine if it's just the two of us, but with a family of 3, it became clear that it was not possible to survive on my husband's low income. Children, as they grow, cost money. Thinking about that, I realized that I couldn't take it easy, so I returned to work as soon as my daughter turned 1. I wanted to return to work sooner, but I had a hard time finding a place to leave my daughter. As a result, it took me half a year to find a suitable daycare. I was unable to get used to leaving my daughter at daycare while working, and spent days with the feeling of guilt. I didn't want my daughter to experience the same loneliness that I did. I wanted to be a housewife until my daughter entered middle school, if possible. My mother was also a working mother, and ever since I could remember, I was always left at my grandparents' house or a daycare center during the day. Although I felt lonely, I never hated my mother. When my mother came home, she saw me every day, and no matter how tired she was there for me. It was the same with my father. I could feel that my parents loved me very much. I encouraged myself thinking that if my mother could do it, there was no way I couldn't do it, even if I came home tired or late from working overtime. I prioritized spending time with my daughter and showered her with my love. My husband, thankfully, seemed to work in a department where he had a lot of free time. He didn't have to work overtime or work on holidays, It even seemed possible to work from home. And when I returned to work, he increased his time working from home. I increasingly asked my husband to pick up and drop off our daughter from nursery school. But my husband didn't mind, and willingly participated in raising our daughter. I realized once again that I was glad that I married my husband. He was a person who loved working for others. He even seemed to sometimes do volunteer work on the weekends as well. When my daughter got a little older, I wanted to resume volunteering in the community too. One day I came home from work and was changing my daughter's clothes. I noticed that my daughter had a bump on her head. It wasn't there when I changed her that morning, so something must have happened while I wasn't there. When I asked my husband about it, he said that she had hit her head on the corner of a table leg. Because of the size of the lump, she must have been crying in pain. Besides, I couldn't tell just by looking at her head, so I naturally assumed he had taken her to the hospital. "Are you going to the hospital just because she bumped her head?" "That's an exaggeration," my husband said with a laugh. My rationality suddenly burst out, and I argued with my husband in a quarrelsome way. Even adults are told that if they hit their head, a thorough examination is required. So why would an amateur husband make his own decision? Then my husband asked me why he should be complained to since he was working from home and taking care of her. "If you're going to say that, don't work overtime and come home for your daughter. I mean, you're a mother, so you have better priorities than making money, right?" Which mouth will say it? That's what I thought, but I held it in because if I said this, the fight would probably get even more intense. In the first place, there would be no problem if the husband earned more money. If the company doesn't have much work, he can take on a part-time job in the evening or get a job at a company with a better salary. Parenting has only just begun. I have a long way to go, so I wonder if it's okay to stay like this. Little by little, I began to feel uneasy about my husband's overly laid-back way of thinking. After that incident, I started to avoid leaving my daughter in the care of my husband, and I started taking care of her whenever possible. For the time being, the company had shown that it understood married women. They even allowed me to take temporary leave from work. However, I can't say over and over again, I can't work overtime. I worked hard to perfectly balance childcare and work while making arrangements with the nursery school where I was leaving my child. One day, after about 2 months of living like this, there was a work-related funeral that I couldn't afford to miss. A high-ranking business partner who had been indebted to me had passed away, and I had to attend the funeral. Due to the sudden situation, I couldn't ask for daycare, so I had no choice but to leave my daughter in the care of my husband. Regarding the previous incident where our daughter hit her head, she went to the hospital with my husband the next day and received an explanation of her symptoms. In the end, it wasn't something I was worried about, but the doctor who examined her told my husband that there was nothing serious this time, but that this doesn't happen every time, so we should keep an eye on our daughter. He was given a very strict warning because of this. My husband seemed to have had a lot of remorse. "Can I leave her to you this time?" I asked him. He said it was okay because he wouldn't make the same mistake twice. I trusted my husband's words and left her to him. However, I still couldn't shake my concerns, so I contacted my husband about the nearest station and also contacted him to confirm before going to the local funeral home. Even though I thought that if I persisted too much, he might turn me off, I couldn't help but say it. However, this time my husband did not react negatively to my persistent calls, and he responded kindly to me by saying, "You're a worrier." My husband was probably growing up as a father, so I told myself it would be okay and went into the funeral home. After being present until the casket was removed, I immediately went home because I was still worried about my daughter. An employee who was also a housewife had come by car, so I gratefully asked her to give me a ride. This is because I could get home earlier than by train. I asked my coworker to drive me to my house, and after seeing her off until the car drove away, I went inside. Then I heard my daughter crying from the living room. When I hurried to the living room, I found my daughter lying on her back, crying loudly. However, my husband did not even bother to soothe her. Instead, he was engrossed in watching TV and occasionally laughed. "Hey, what are you doing?" I turned off the TV that my husband was watching and screamed. He yelled at me lightly, telling me not to turn it off even though it was interesting. And he snatched the remote control from my hand to continue watching the TV. My husband didn't like my yelling, so he turned up the volume on the TV. Then my daughter's cries gradually stopped echoing. I quickly realized that the TV volume was not the only culprit. My daughter's face became increasingly pale, and she seemed to be having trouble breathing. "You please drive the car now." I was allowed to drive, but since I was a paper driver, I didn't have confidence in driving. First, we didn't get rid of our car, even though my husband's salary was not enough to support a family of 3, because I thought it would be convenient in case something happened to our daughter. "She didn't hit her head today. She's just grumpy, right? Just leave her alone." "Did you look at her face and leave her alone? Just take her to the hospital, okay? Now it's getting exciting, so after this is over." There was no blood on my daughter's lips anymore. I felt like her breathing was slowing down. I decided I couldn't wait for my husband to take action, so I called for an ambulance. I prepared only what I needed and rode with the ambulance when it arrived. I asked to head for the pediatrician where my daughter was being cared for. However, since it was a holiday evening and there was no emergency response, I had to look for another hospital. The ambulance will not depart until the destination has been determined. After being turned down by 2 hospitals, it was finally decided that she would be transferred to a general hospital in a neighboring city. During that time, my husband was absorbed in watching TV and showed no interest in anything. I just told my husband that I would contact him when we arrived at the hospital, and I headed to the hospital with my daughter. When she was transported, the doctor on duty examined and treated her. To be honest, I was worried, because when I thought of an on-duty doctor, I felt like a part-time doctor. However, the doctor performed everything from a thorough examination to quick treatment. The doctor told me that if I had waited a little longer, it would have been very dangerous. But then he told me that the procedure was completed successfully and that he was relieved. When I heard those words, I felt as if all the strength in my knees suddenly went weak. A nurse called out to me and told me that the doctor would give me an explanation. My daughter also had to stay overnight at the hospital for observation. The doctor would first explain the conclusion. It turned out that my daughter had been mistaken for an e-cigarette. Although it was a small amount, my 1-year-old daughter's body could not accept it, and her condition suddenly changed. The doctor asked if her housemate smoked, and I reflexively shook my head from side to side. That's because when I found out I was pregnant, my husband told me he would quit smoking. Since then, I have never seen him smoke. There was also no smell of cigarettes, so I always assumed that he had stopped smoking. But the reality was different. He was hiding from me and was sucking so I wouldn't find out. I shook my head once, but then I told the doctor again that there was a possibility that my husband was smoking without my knowledge. Then my husband came to the hospital looking listless. The moment I saw him, I couldn't help but ask, "Why did you keep smoking in secret? It's okay if you smoke in secret, but don't smoke in front of your daughter." "Oh, what? All of a sudden it isn't okay already? The pregnancy period has passed." "That's not the issue. My husband seemed to be a stranger and said that since she was safe, it was okay, right?" He made comments that belittled his daughter's condition. Then the doctor, who had been silent until now, raised his voice. "I'm not going to question why you smoke behind your wife's back. However, children are interested in everything and tend to put it in their mouths right away. Yet if you're a father, it's common sense to keep things that your daughter accidentally swallows out of her reach. Furthermore, even though we live in an area where smoking is said to be harmful even to adults, my husband was strongly criticized for not being able to imagine what would happen if a 1-year-old child ingested it. Why do I have to be blamed so much? Don't be silly." Perhaps the husband was embarrassed by being scolded by the doctor. Or perhaps his self-esteem was hurt. But his face turned red and he became unfaithful and he ran away from the room. Honestly, it doesn't matter if my husband isn't here. I also wonder if my daughter would be able to sleep more peacefully without my husband, who didn't help her when she was suffering. I felt that my priority now was to be by my daughter's side, who had endured so much pain in her small body, rather than chasing after my husband who had run away. The next day, I went to see the pediatrician, who advised me to stay in the hospital for a while longer to see how things were going. The doctor on duty said that my daughter could be discharged from the hospital and that the diagnosis was correct. But considering that I was working during the day, they thought it would be better for her to stay in a hospital with full nursing care. I returned home to prepare for my daughter's hospitalization, but it was difficult for me to go to work, so I called in for the day off. When I returned home, there was no sign that my husband had returned. If he had just succumbed and returned home, we might have had a chance to try again. However, he doesn't even feel bad about what he did to our daughter and turns a blind eye when it is pointed out to him. He becomes unfaithful and runs away from home. Is this something adults do? What he's doing is astounding, as if he were a junior high school student. My daughter now has to make a full recovery, but after that, I am strongly considering divorcing my husband. But even after 3 days, he has not returned. I looked for clues, but I couldn't find him at all. On the 5th day, I thought I couldn't stay like this, so I contacted my parents-in-law. Naturally, I also revealed everything that led to this point. My in-laws, who were contacted by me, found out that my husband was only going to work, so they ambushed him at his workplace. I contacted his company once when he didn't come home. However, I was told that my husband was not at work at that time. I don't know if that's what my husband told coworkers to do when I called him or if he wasn't at work, but I was relieved that he was okay. He's a bad person as an adult, husband, and father, but I would feel bad if he just let himself die. Even if there was a problem with my husband's behavior, I didn't feel good about breaking up with him after a fight, and I thought it was cowardly for him to leave without even apologizing for what he did to our daughter. When my husband noticed his parents-in-law who were ambushing him, he ran away as fast as he could. However, it seems that he was unable to escape from his mother, who had been a strong track and field athlete during her school days. My father-in-law caught up to him and held him down. My husband desperately resisted, but he was no match for his father, who was good at sports. Unlike my husband, when my parents-in-law caught him and brought him back, his suit was in tatters. In addition, since I had already reported everything about the treatment of our daughter, it seems that the matter was also narrowed down. My husband had already lost his will to fight and was exhausted. After my husband fled from the hospital that day, he went straight to a hotel without ever coming home. It seems like he got a change of clothes there as well. Where was all that money? I'd like to question him, but right now I'm more interested in the way he treats my daughter than the source of the money. Weren't you worried about your daughter? Even if you didn't want to see me, you didn't even think to check with the hospital to see her when I wasn't there. There's no point in going as an amateur like me, right? You can leave illnesses and injuries to the doctors. I'm not saying that, but as a person and a father, aren't you worried? I understand that there are people in this world who do not experience motherhood or fatherhood even after becoming parents, or who cannot embrace it at all. But what do you mean you don't even worry about our daughter as a person? Does this mean that your volunteer work was just a facade? I was more disappointed in his lack of human emotion than I was in my husband's lack of fatherhood. I'm sorry, but I don't think I can do anything with you anymore. Let's divorce. Divorce? Isn't that an exaggeration for such a small thing? It's because my daughter put an e-cigarette in her mouth without permission in the first place, right? It's because you don't discipline her properly. If I could, I would like to spend more time with my daughter and slowly teach her various things. Moreover, it would be many times easier for an adult to be careful than to discipline a young daughter. I want to say that it's because my husband doesn't make enough money, but I felt like I shouldn't say that as I was feeling confused and wondering how to convince him. My father-in-law, who had been silently watching us talk, opened up to me. Don't get too lazy. It's probably because you don't have the patience to begin with. I heard that my husband initially worked for a company that paid more than his current one, but the work was so intense that he quit and found his current company. The company's conditions are no overtime, no business trips or transfers, and no working on holidays. He chose the company because he wanted to use his time meaningfully, rather than the fact that his salary would not increase no matter how many years he worked there. When I married him, his parents seemed to be surprised that I had decided to marry him with such a low income. Nowadays, it's an old-fashioned idea that men are the breadwinners of the family, and it's not a bad thing for those who can earn money to earn money, and those who can't earn money to take care of the house. They thought my husband and I had gotten married based on that promise. This is what happens because you try to show off when you're half a normal person. Marriage means taking on the responsibility of the other person's life. If you're not prepared for that, you don't deserve to have a family. It seems that his father has disciplined him very harshly, and my husband is unable to object because he is under the pressure of his father's sword. My husband was told that he needed to improve his attitude, and that he had to go to the martial arts gym every day if he wanted to continue our marriage. In a low voice, he whispered, "I'm getting a divorce." He seems to have been traumatized by the harsh treatment he received during his childhood at the gym where his father taught him, and it seems that just looking at his martial arts uniform makes him hyperventilate. He cried out that he would rather get divorced than go through the nightmare again. and with the help of his father's pressure, we managed to smooth out the divorce after a while. After the divorce, my husband contacted me. When I divorced my husband, we agreed that our daughter's child support would be paid in installments at the end of every month until our daughter reached the age of 20. My parents-in-law will strictly check his payments, and so far there have been no delays in payments. However, it was about time for him to pay. So I wondered if he would tell me that he couldn't pay his child support. I answered the phone. My coworker saw me being restrained by my father using ground techniques. The incident was so flashy that it even became a hot topic at my husband's workplace. My husband felt shamed by his father and confessed to his colleague what he had done to his daughter, saying even though it was a small thing, everyone around me made a fuss. He also reportedly said, "I was just looking at my daughter at my wife's request, but she got mad at me," which is a big nuisance. I did ask him to watch my daughter carefully so she wouldn't fall or hit her head. That didn't mean he should just watch, but he explained that I told him to watch, so he did, but it had the opposite effect. My colleague said, "You're the worst. That's the same as saying you didn't go after the thief because you asked him to watch your bag, but he didn't ask you to get it back after he took it away. You're just a perverse kid, aren't you?" And it ended. Moreover, my husband spoke so loudly in the company cafeteria that all the employees around him could hear him. He overheard a rumor about him that employees were accusing him of being insane. His boss called him in and even lectured him, asking him, "What did you learn through volunteer work?" He felt uncomfortable as he was looked at with disdain within the company. His work has been affected, and he will not be able to pay child support if this continues. So he cried and asked me to explain to them that he wasn't at fault and that I was just making a fuss. My husband showed no remorse. He just doesn't want his father to get mad at him, so he only pays child support in the divorce. It's possible that he married me because he saw me as nothing more than a nice sucker who could have fun. In the end, our marriage was one in which I supported most of it, if not all of it. You've never apologized to me or my daughter, have you? Of course, I don't remember ever being thanked. Why should I do what you asked? I agreed to the divorce and child support, right? What more do you want from me? Hey, please, isn't it your turn to listen to my request? Because of you, I was scolded by my father. My head hurts when I listen to your arguments that don't make sense at all. I told him not to call me again regarding anything other than child support and hung up. However, he called me back immediately and insisted, "Please." It was so annoying that I told him that his father was coming over to say hello. Then my husband said nothing, and the persistent phone call stopped. After a while, I heard from my parents-in-law that my husband found it difficult to work at the company, so he resigned voluntarily. My husband, who has no technical ability, seems to have managed to get a job again, but only at a company with an even lower salary. He asked his parents for financial support, but his father cut it off. Wouldn't the rent be cheaper if you lived at home? His mother told him that, but he said that he did not want to live with his father and seemed to be managing to get by on a low income. However, things got tough, and he contacted me. He requested that the amount be reduced as child support was a major hindrance. The only thing you can do is pay for your daughter, so do at least that much. If you want the amount reduced, let's both talk through our lawyers. Even if it goes to court, I will not accept the reduction. When I told him that even if he fell behind even more, I would go to court to collect the money, he said that it would be better to pay child support than pay attorney fees, and so far the promised amount has been transferred on the scheduled date. I returned home and, with the help of my parents, I am balancing childcare and work. My father told me he could still work, so he was rehired, and he worked 3 days a week at the company where he worked until retirement. My mother retired before reaching retirement age for the sake of my daughter. I felt sorry for my mother who loved her job, but she wanted to do for her granddaughter what she couldn't do for me. She tells me not to worry about it because she's just self-satisfied, and she always stays by my daughter's side so that my daughter doesn't get lonely. When I get home, someone is waiting for me. I feel relieved when I can see the lights of my house. The family I longed for is now in front of me. Now that I was able to return to my parents' home where I could leave my daughter with no worries, I devoted myself to work even more than before. After returning home, I had to spend more time commuting to work, but after a while, I was assigned to a branch near my parents' home. I still keep in touch with my in-laws. They watch over my daughter's growth by talking directly with smartphones and by sharing videos of her. We have only one desire in common. I hope my daughter grows up healthy. Thanks for watching. How did you find the story? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more awesome stories like this. Your feedback and support mean a lot.